Emily stood alone on the deserted platform, the cold wind whispering through the empty station. The train's headlights appeared in the distance, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. As she stepped onto the aged platform, Emily's heart quickened. The train, an ancient relic from another era, loomed before her like a ghostly apparition. Its metal body groaned as if protesting against the passage of time, its windows reflecting back the dim glow of the station's flickering lights. Clutching her ticket tightly, Emily hesitated for a moment, unnerved by the oppressive silence that enveloped the platform. A figure emerged from the shadows, startling Emily. He wore a faded conductor's uniform that seemed out of place in the modern world. His face was weathered, lines etched deep with age and worry. "You shouldn't be traveling alone on this train," he muttered, his voice a hushed whisper that carried an undercurrent of fear. Emily glanced into his eyes that held a history she couldn't decipher, filled with a mixture of sadness and warning. Gesturing towards the empty compartments ahead, the conductor's hand trembled slightly, as if haunted by memories he couldn't forget. Inside the carriage, the air was thick with a sense of abandonment. Rows of worn seats stretched down the length of the compartment, their faded upholstery cracked and frayed. Dust motes danced in the dim light that filtered through fogged windows, casting ethereal patterns on the floor. Emily hesitated before choosing a seat, her footsteps echoing hollowly as she made her way down the aisle. The silence was palpable, broken only by the occasional creak of the train's joints and the distant whistle of wind slipping through the gaps in the windows. Unease settled over Emily like a heavy shroud, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. At the end of the carriage, Emily noticed a door that stood out from the others, a door that was locked. Its surface was marred by faint scratches, almost imperceptible in the low light. Curiosity mingled with trepidation as Emily approached, her hand hesitating just inches from the tarnished handle. The door rattled suddenly, a sharp, metallic sound that reverberated through the carriage. Emily jumped back, her pulse racing, as if whatever lay beyond was eager to break free. Moving into the next carriage, Emily was greeted by the sound of laughter, a child's laughter. It echoed through the narrow corridor, playful yet strangely unsettling in its solitary existence. Emily followed the sound, her footsteps muffled by the worn carpet beneath her feet. Each compartment she entered seemed to lead her deeper into a maze of shadows, the laughter growing louder, yet always just out of reach. She paused, her breath catching in her throat as the laughter abruptly ceased, leaving behind a silence that was almost deafening. In the dimly lit restroom, Emily approached a cracked mirror that hung precariously on the wall. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and uncertain in the flickering light. But as she turned away, a movement caught her eye, a figure standing behind her in the mirror's reflection. Emily spun around, her heart racing, but the restroom was empty save for her trembling form. The mirror continued to crackle softly, as if holding onto a secret it couldn't quite reveal. As Emily moved through the carriages, she encountered another passenger, a man who seemed as lost and bewildered as she felt. "I boarded alone," he insisted, confusion etching lines on his face. His presence sent a chill down Emily's spine as she realized with a sinking feeling that this man had disappeared on this very train years ago. His ghostly presence was a haunting reminder of the train's dark and mysterious history, a history that seemed to repeat itself with every journey. Beneath a pile of forgotten luggage, Emily's hand brushed against something unexpected, a dusty diary. Its leather cover was worn and cracked, pages yellowed with age. As she flipped through its contents, Emily's eyes widened in horror. The diary detailed tragic accidents, mysterious disappearances, and sightings of ghostly figures haunting the train's carriages over the decades. Each word seemed to leap off the page, imprinting itself in her mind like a curse that she couldn't escape. A broken window caught Emily's attention, shards of glass glinting in the faint light that filtered through. Through the jagged gap, she caught a fleeting glimpse of a face, a pale, sorrowful visage staring in from the darkness outside. Before Emily could react, the face vanished, leaving behind only shattered glass and an unnerving sense of being watched by something that existed beyond the confines of the train. Despite Emily's growing unease, the train continued its relentless journey through desolate landscapes that blurred into a nightmarish tableau of twisted trees and shadowy figures. The night grew darker, suffocatingly so, as if the train itself resisted any attempt to leave its predetermined path. Emily's attempts to find an exit were futile, the train's iron grip tightening with each passing mile, dragging her further into a realm where reality and nightmare intertwined. A ghostly figure materialized before Emily, a ticket collector from a bygone era, his uniform faded and threadbare. His spectral form passed through the carriages with an eerie grace, demanding tickets from passengers who had long since departed. His voice echoed hauntingly, each word laden with the weight of unfinished journeys and forgotten souls. Emily watched in silence, her breath catching in her throat, as the phantom ticket collector faded into the shadows once more. In a dimly lit corridor, Emily encountered a child, a lost soul with eyes that held a haunting familiarity. "Help me," the child whispered, their voice fragile and filled with an innocence lost to time. Emily reached out, her fingers brushing against the child's ethereal form, only to watch in dismay as they vanished into the darkness. Their whispered plea echoed in Emily's mind, a poignant reminder of the train's spectral inhabitants who wandered aimlessly through its corridors. Across from Emily, a passenger vanished before her eyes, a specter that dissolved into wisps of mist, leaving behind an empty seat and a lingering chill that permeated the air. Emily stared at the vacant space, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and fascination, as if witnessing the impossible unfold before her very eyes. Voices whispered in Emily's ears as she walked down the narrow corridor, their words a cacophony of pleas, warnings, and confessions that intertwined with the rhythmic clatter of the train's wheels against the tracks. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision, elusive and mocking in their presence, as if the very essence of the train itself sought to ensnare her in its spectral grip. Emily stumbled upon a locked compartment, the air around it thick with a palpable sense of foreboding. From within came eerie laughter, high-pitched and tinged with madness, mingled with the sound of scratching against wood, a cacophony of dread that froze Emily in place, her pulse pounding in her ears as she stood transfixed by the unknown horrors lurking behind the door. Through a grimy window, Emily glimpsed a spectral figure on the tracks, a brakeman frozen in eternal struggle, his ghostly form pulling desperately at a lever to halt the speeding train. His face was twisted with anguish and despair, eyes wide with a plea for release that echoed through the night air. Emily watched in silence, her breath catching in her throat, as the figure faded into the darkness, leaving behind an unsettling silence that reverberated through her very soul. The train passed an abandoned junction, a place where a horrific accident had claimed countless lives in a cacophony of twisted metal and shattered dreams. Ghostly figures of the victims stood on the tracks, their translucent forms bathed in an otherworldly glow that cast long shadows across the desolate landscape. Their eyes pleaded for release from their spectral prison, a haunting reminder of the train's tragic past that lingered like a ghostly echo in the night. A fellow passenger's face contorted into a grotesque mask of malevolence, their eyes glowing with an unholy light that pierced through the darkness like twin beacons of terror. Emily recoiled in horror as the entity stalked the carriages, its presence tainting the air with a palpable sense of fear and unease that threatened to consume her very being. Shadows seemed to writhe and twist around the demonic figure, their movements mirroring the chaotic turmoil that churned within Emily's own mind. The train screeched to a halt at a ghostly station lost in time, a place where the spirits of past passengers wandered aimlessly, trapped in an eternal limbo of regret and unfinished journeys. The platform was bathed in an ethereal glow that cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, as if the very essence of the train itself had seeped into the very fabric of reality. Emily stepped onto the platform, her footsteps echoing hollowly in the silence, as she gazed upon the spectral forms that drifted like wisps of smoke through the abandoned station. As Emily stood alone on the platform, a sinking realization washed over her. Realization that she was trapped in a loop, condemned to ride this haunted train forever. Shadows enveloped her like a suffocating cloak, their tendrils reaching out to drag her back into the darkness that lurked within the train's iron embrace. The train lurched forward once more, its wheels grinding against the tracks in a symphony of despair that echoed through the night, as Emily's fate became intertwined with the tragic history of the train, a history that refused to be forgotten, even as the world outside continued to turn.